Welcome to this explainer. Let's just dive right into it today. Our goal here is to unpack some of the most profound, ancient concepts in human history. Specifically, we're looking at the Buddhist ideas of emptiness and dependent origination. Now, these can be pretty heavy topics, but we're going to break down the source text's modern framework so you can easily grasp exactly what's being proposed.
To do that, we're going straight to our source material, a fascinating text called The Challenge of Enlightenment. Specifically, we'll be focusing on Chapter 5, which is actually based on a Dharma talk given back on April 2nd, 1992. The whole point of this text is to clarify these teachings that, honestly, even Buddhist experts often find confusing. It offers Happy Science's original interpretation to kind of pull back the curtain on the practical mechanics underneath these central concepts.
So here is our roadmap for the breakdown. First, we'll look at emptiness versus nothingness. Second, impermanence versus non-self. Third, we'll explore perspective 1, the spiritual cycle. Fourth, perspective 2, materializing light. And finally, perspective 3, dependent origination.
All right, starting with section 1, emptiness versus nothingness. Let's get our definition straight. Now, this is the classic and, let's be honest, slightly terrifying question people often have about Eastern philosophy, right? If the ultimate goal of enlightenment is to realize emptiness, does that mean you just vanish? Do you just pop out of existence into some dark, empty void? It's a super common misconception, and it makes enlightenment sound way more like an existential nightmare than an actual spiritual awakening.
But the source text makes a really sharp distinction here. To clear that up, it defines nothingness as a completely hypothetical state. Think of it like someone hitting a cosmic pause button, a complete cessation of existence where time stops entirely. But the text argues that is simply not reality. Emptiness, on the other hand, absolutely does not mean blank. It means that things do exist, but they are dynamically changing over time. They don't have a permanently fixed physical substance. So emptiness is all about constant, flowing transformation, not some static, empty void.
Moving on to section 2, impermanence versus non-self. This is all about looking at two very different scales of change. The text argues that the crucial difference between these two concepts is just scale. Impermanence is what we can observe right here on Earth. It's the physical life and death cycle, birth, growth, and decay. Like a seed growing into a beautiful flower that eventually withers away. But to understand non-self, the text asks us to zoom way, way out to a cosmic scale. It's looking at the grand, continuous cycle of a soul moving back and forth across different dimensions. To really map out this idea of emptiness, the text uses a brilliant rule of 3 framework. It breaks it down into the spiritual cycle, the materialization of light, and dependent origination. Let's dive into that first perspective in section 3, the spiritual cycle. The text uses this really relatable movie theater analogy. Imagine you're sitting in a cinema. The explosions, the romance, the action on the screen, it all feels intensely real in the moment, right? But the screen itself is literally just a flat 2D surface. The actual source of the movie is the film rolling in the projector behind you. According to this interpretation, our earthly lives are just like that projection. They are temporary, physical manifestations of our deeper, eternal soul. So physical existence is empty because it's merely a temporary projection, not the actual, eternal source.
Next up, section 4, perspective 2, materializing light. This one sounds almost like modern physics.
Seriously, think about this for a second. If our true nature is just spiritual, invisible energy, how on earth do we end up with physical bodies, or solid chairs, or heavy rocks? How does spiritual energy actually take physical form?
The text answers this with what it calls the materialization phenomenon. It claims that absolutely everything is fundamentally composed of Buddha's light, or divine light. When this light exists at a super high wavelength, it stays invisible. But when that light slows down, it becomes denser and heavier until it physically materializes into matter. So the text argues that our solid physical world is actually just a temporary, slowed down state of energy. That is essentially emptiness in action.
And that brings us to section 5, the third and final perspective, dependent origination.
Now, here's the logical paradox the text attempts to address. We've just established that everything is constantly changing, it's just a projection, and it's basically just slowed down light without a fixed physical core. Okay, so why isn't everything just falling apart? How does any coherent object or person manage to exist at all?
The text breaks this down using the concept of causes and conditions. Think about chemistry. Look at hydrogen and oxygen. They are the cause.
But you can't just put them in a room and expect a puddle. You need an environmental condition, like heat or a spark. Only when the cause meets the right condition do you get the result, water. The exact same thing goes for nature. A seed requires the conditions of soil, moisture, and sunlight to actually become a flower. According to the text, nothing exists independently. The entire universe relies on this incredibly intricate, continuous interplay.
To really drive this home, the text uses a bullet train analogy. If you snap a photo of a roaring bullet train as it zips past, in that photo, it looks perfectly solid and totally frozen in place. But we know that static image is an illusion, right? It's actually in constant, massive forward motion. The text suggests that our physical reality is exactly like that photograph. What feels like solid, permanent reality to us is really just a momentary snapshot of an ever-changing web of causes and conditions.
To tie this whole metaphysical framework together, the source synthesizes these ideas perfectly. It shows us that emptiness is not some dark, scary void. Instead, it proposes that the universe lacks rigid physical boundaries precisely because it is a dynamic, living thing, constantly sustained and transformed by descending spiritual light. So, what is the big takeaway here? Consider this framework for a moment. If you started viewing your physical reality not as a permanent, rigid trap, but as a temporary condition born from a massive, interconnected spiritual web, how would that shift your perspective? If your daily stresses and roadblocks are just fleeting snapshots of a much larger cosmic journey, the world might just look a little bit different, wouldn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this helped unpack these incredible concepts for you.